September. It's my first video. I'm going to talk about my top 5 books from 2021. I only read, I think, 37 books in 2021, which is only like half of what I read in 2020. I read less books. I think it was TikTok's fault, my fault for scrolling on TikTok. So out of 37 books, I picked my top 5. This list started out at 10 books, but I felt like that would be a really long video for me because I'm going to ramble. So, number 5, I have my notebook here, if you see me looking down. Number 5 is Millard Salter's Last Day by Jacob M. Appel. And I had heard about Jacob Appel from a Amazon Prime documentary that I watched called Jacob. And it was essentially just like talking about him and who he is now. And I'm going to read this like blurb for the documentary. Just like the first sentence. He's a doctor, lawyer, bioethicist, college professor, licensed New York City tour guide, poet, playwright, award-winning novelist, devoted son, and true friend. This guy, I think he has 7 master's degrees, and he's like not boastful about anything. At least that's what I remember from the documentary. But I was just fascinated by him. Let's put a trigger warning in here for suicide. The title character plans on ending his life at the end of the day, and he wants to do this because he's seen people get old and become dependent on others, and he does not want to be a burden on anyone, and he does not want to have a lower quality of life, so he wants to end his life on his own terms. Throughout the book, he is tying up his loose ends. He's actually doing like his day of work, I believe. Like he works at a hospital and he sees patients, he talks to coworkers, he has to visit his son on his lunch break, he visits his ex-wife, and it's just very enjoyable to follow him throughout his day, knowing that it's going to end at a certain point. There are some interactions and scenes where it feels like it's just prolonging the end and you're never going to get to it. But there's a lot of humor in it, and it's just interesting to watch a character that you know is going to die go through a regular day. And to see how others in his life are acting towards him, not knowing that it's his last day. And I hope this isn't a spoiler because even the title says it's his last day. But there's a lot of hope throughout the book. At least I had hope where like he has an interaction with somebody and maybe it'll change his mind. And like throughout the story you're kind of thinking maybe he won't at the end, but he does end up killing himself. And what's really interesting is the epigraph. I always read them thinking like I'm going to figure out how this little puzzle piece fits into the story. So the epigraph is, most things will never happen, ... This one will. And that's a line by Philip Larkin from a poem, Outlawed. And just that line, most things will never happen, this one will. I read it, didn't think about it the entire time I read the book. He dies at the end, and then I remembered they told me he was gonna die. I just loved seeing his personal interactions, family dynamics, being able to ponder the implications of suicide, and all while there is some humor in it. But it was a great read. Number 4 was A Touch of Jen by Beth Morgan. So I think I saw this book on Instagram. I think it was kind of like just popping up on the internet, and it has just like a very Instagram looking cover. Psychedelic horror and comedy. That's just everything I want to read. One other woman in my book club had wanted to read it too, so we read it together. And it was just crazy. Like, I don't even know if I can give a good summary. I'm gonna try. I wrote, what even is the plot? But it starts out with a couple, Alicia and Rami, and they're both obsessed with Rami's old co-worker, Jen, to the point where Alicia is like role-playing her, and it's kind of creepy, but it's funny. They're kind of a boring couple to watch, and as the story progresses, Alicia becomes more obsessed with Jen, and she's just putting on a persona of Jen throughout her interactions, like making an Instagram where she's being Jen, and something really crazy happens in the plot, and then things just unravel from there. I was just shocked, and things happen to where you're like, is this real? Is this not real? What is their reality and what is something happening inside their mind? It's just it's very entertaining. It's very thought-provoking, but very confusing. I couldn't even really tell you what happened the last third of the book, but I just know that I enjoyed it. And it does examine like somebody's social media presence, what is put up for a show, how a person really is, and what can happen if the lines are blurred and someone believes that somebody's who they are on social media and not who they are in real life. But I think I gave it 5 stars. I feel like I should reread it just to better understand it. I don't know if I could figure out what's real and what's not real, but I think that's all part of it. It's pretty good. And the other woman that read it with me, she enjoyed it too, but we were both just so confused. If you've read it, I'm okay with spoilers on the channel, especially in the comments. So if you think you have a good theory of what was really happening, put it in the comments and tell me. Number 3 is Outlawed by Anna North. When I read this for book club, I read it twice in a row. I loved it so much. I was like, I'm gonna make a booktube channel just because of this book. But I never did because I was afraid. But I'm here now talking about it. But now I'm so removed from it. I wish I would have made a video, like a full review video right then and there. But maybe that'll come someday. I loved this book. So it's set in the 1890s, and I think like they call it a great flu had cleansed the world. And the main character, her name is Ada. She is recently married. She has not been able to have children. I think it's within the first couple months of her being married. She's not able to have children. Her mother is a midwife, and she was training to become a midwife. But in this society, it kind of reminds me of like Handmaid's Tale type dystopian pressurized society. So in this society, it's an expectation that women should have children pretty soon after marriage to essentially, I think, repopulate the earth after the Great Flu. So when Ada is unable to have children, she's thinking that she's essentially barren, and barrenness in the mind of like her townspeople equals witchcraft. And all of the young girls, especially like some of her friends, are even worried about her being barren because they think she's a witch, and then they think that she's going to curse everybody. So she's not able to train under her mother anymore. She was kind of hanging around home and just staying out of things, but the sheriff came and essentially told her mother that Ada would have to leave. She goes to a convent of some sort, and she reads a lot of books there, and she studies like female reproductive systems. There's even, I think, books on abortion, and she really learns about her barrenness, and I think accepts that it's just essentially anatomy and just part of her anatomy and not related to anything she's done wrong or witchcraft. And she reads a book by a certain female doctor, and she wants to travel to where this doctor was because there's like a surgery center there, and she wants to help with that. So the mother superior of the convent tells her that she should go to this place in the desert called the Hole in the Wall, and the leader of this outlaw gang had been helped by this mother superior, and the leader's name is the Kid. And what I really love about this book is the way that they include like just a spectrum of genders. So the Kid does not identify as male or female, and that is put out there like real early. When Ada comes upon them in the desert, some bookseller takes her in his wagon, and she gets out there. She meets all of these women. I think there's 6 of them. So 6 women plus the leader, the Kid. None of them really trust her at first, but they essentially start like training her up to go on these jobs with her, and they all, except for one, dress as men to go on these jobs to like pull off robberies and heists. And essentially at one point the Kid comes up with a plan to rob a bank and then buy back the bank so that they can take over the town, own the town that the bank is in, because the Kid's plan is to create like a sanctuary where barren women can come to live without being ostracized. You watch Ada develop friendships, overcome adversities. There are 2 thieves that they meet. One is named Lark, and Ada and him, their relationship is really interesting to see. So the last like third of the book plays out how the plan to rob the bank goes and what happens to certain characters. And it comes to a good end. There are some sad parts, some really sad parts, but I just really love this book and how it uses gender, how it examines what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman. I like how it's a Western and it kind of twists the genre, and I just really like the aspect of a found family. I always love that trope in books, found family, and how your friends become your family, and how everyone ends up taking care of each other. So I gave this 5 stars, and I read it twice, one after the other. I annotated, like I highlighted so much in this book, and I think I will end up doing a review video, but I feel like I have to read it one more time and go back through. So number 2 and number 1. I wrote these out in order, so I think going backwards in order, I'm going to have to just say what 2 and 1 are. So my top 2 books were The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, and number 1 was We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. I read these in October. I listened to the audiobooks for both of them, and I feel like I fell in love. Like, We Have Always Lived in the Castle is one of my very favorite books that I've ever read. But I'll start with The Haunting of Hill House. It follows one main character, Eleanor, and it centers around 4 characters who are Dr. Montague. He's like a ghost hunter. Eleanor Vance. She's like this isolated young woman who had previously been caring for her sick mother. Her mother ended up dying. She has a sister that she's kind of estranged from. This woman named Theodora, and she's like bohemian, fanciful woman that's just there. And the 4th character is Luke, and he is the heir to the house. So the book pretty much just like follows them through a couple nights of them staying at the house, experiencing like supernatural activity. But it's more psychological than scary. Like sometimes you can't really tell if the noises that the characters are hearing are really happening or if they're imagining them, especially when it comes to what Eleanor's experiencing, because it does say, I think at the beginning or towards the beginning of the book, that she had experienced some supernatural things in the past. So I feel like she has like a predisposition to experience more things, but she's also kind of losing touch with reality as the book goes on. At one point she hears yelling in the house, and she believes that it's her mother yelling for her, and that really like messes with her, and she becomes really afraid. Nothing really happens. Like, it just feels like an old episode of like Ghost Hunters, where like you don't find out what it is causing this stuff, but it's just like an exploration. The end is very shocking, but in a way it felt very peaceful, to me at least. Like I loved the ending. It just meant everything to me. It was such a good character study, and the way that it looked at mental health without really putting a definition on what was happening. Kind of explored like personal isolation, and it was just very character driven with the supernatural psychological thriller aspect going on in the background. But I gave this book 5 stars. I loved it. And then number 1, We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. You know, I'm surprised. Actually, no, I'm not surprised. I've never purposefully read anything by her. I'm not a big horror or thriller person, but I just really love her style, and just kind of like how it's like character study and like nothing's really happening and the books aren't really scary. As I said before, I read this in October, and we did read this for book club. So it focuses on 2 sisters mostly, Mary Cat and Constance Blackwood. Their uncle's also in there, Uncle Julian. But they live in a big house with like a large amount of land, and they're pretty isolated as a family. Mary Cat is the only one who goes out into town. So the book starts out with her going to like the grocery store and walking down like the main street of town. And she's just very fearful of like all the townspeople. It comes out that, so 6 years ago, at this point in the book, Mary Cat and Constance's parents, their aunt, Uncle Julian's wife, and their younger brother were all murdered by their sugar bowl being poisoned with arsenic. And I think they had berries at dinner, and everybody had sprinkled sugar on their berries except for Constance. And Mary Cat had been sent to bed without dinner. So the brother, the aunt, and the parents died. Uncle Julian had sugar on his berries, but he survived. And at the beginning of the story, like he's in a wheelchair. Constance is taking care of him, and he's always like busy with papers and like writing his memoir. Mary Cat is very protective of Constance. She does these little like magic ritual spells where she, in her mind, is protecting her sister. Like she nails a book to a tree and she buries the family's sapphires by the river. A cousin, like an estranged cousin, comes to the house, and like the Blackwoods are pretty well off. So he comes to the house and he's trying to like befriend Constance and trying to like distance her from Mary Cat. And Mary Cat is obviously upset by this because Constance is like her rock. So the cousin tries to like push Mary Cat away. There is like a major plot point that happens. And then as the ending comes, it's just kind of like, the ending just kind of fades out, which compared to A Haunting of Hill House, the ending is very abrupt. For this book, it's just kind of slow and it just kind of like drifts away and it just feels so right. Like, I like books where like nothing really happens and nothing's like wrapped up at the end. And this is one of those books where like nothing gets really solved. You can't even predict really what happens after. It's just very comforting. Like it feels cozy in a very weird way. Just like A Haunting of Hill House, it examines mental health without really putting a label on it or defining what the core issue is. It just kind of is a character study on somebody who has mental health issues and just how they live day to day and how their family interacts with them. And it really focuses on social isolation and sisterhood. Most of my book club, I didn't go to this meeting, but I had heard because I was just obsessed. I was like, I love it. Did everybody love it? And most of my book club did not love it. I think a lot of people didn't even finish it. One of my friends in book club did like it. It's understandable that they didn't love it. It is kind of like stream of consciousness. And like I said, like nothing is really happening. It's just kind of like observing their lives. It's more like character driven and like a character study versus what my book club usually reads, which is like contemporary. But I loved it. And I listened to the audiobook of this and Haunting of Hill House. And after I finished this one, I listened to this one first. After I finished it, I went out and bought the physical copy right away. I was like, I need this book. I need to read the words and highlight every line that I love. So that's my top 5 books that I read in 2021. Let me know if any of these books were on your top 5. Maybe the Shirley Jackson, maybe Outlawed. I want to know if anybody else has read Millard Salter's Last Day and A Touch of Jen. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. Like this video. The only people I'm probably talking to is my book club and a few friends, and maybe my brother will watch this, but oh, and my husband will watch it. But I've had fun making this video and I hope you guys liked watching it. How do you guys do this with dogs? Ugh.